Uh, Hello, and welcome to a stream. I think I'm gonna try this one without the headphones. Maybe I won't. I think I'll regret that. One moment, since I have one view. Stream markers or timestamps you can add. So I just realized I need to put more time and effort into learning how to deal with YouTube stuff. Oh yeah. I forgot I can't be tapping the table, because when I do, it's like thunder in your ears. Alright, so today we're going to be using the iPad as a reference. And so what I want to cover today is a continuation on last week, or not last week, because it's definitely been a couple more weeks. And I want to talk about that as well. So a couple of things. Update on communication from last stream's attempt at talking about communication, which I don't think was a poor example of communication and how to build it, but it was a poor explanation, because I was trying to do it impromptu, and then I think one of the lessons learned, or one of the visible lessons, is like what happens when you just try to make something work without fully thinking through the idea, versus your second attempt, which takes all of the things you learned about the failures of the first, and then creates a better second one. And then I want to highlight also that just because you've gotten to a point to where you can explain something doesn't mean that you've finished whatever it is you're doing. So that I want to talk about, and I'll do this at the end, but I'll talk about COVID numbers, because we've been seeing an uptick, and then and just what my thoughts on streaming versus what the hell it actually is that I'm doing here, and then we may play around with the mind map on that particular topic to see if I can bring some clarity, and more importantly show people how to conceptualize topics that are not necessarily comfortable, I guess. Again, this is just like everything else. Like the more time you spend in something, the better you are at articulating it, if it's something that you're trying to do, or actively working on. And in the beginning, articulation of a subject that you're unfamiliar with is more difficult, and then it becomes easier over time. So I guess let's just jump into this, to start off with, let's talk about why it's been so long since I've streamed last, and then a little bit of the background behind why I want to stream. So I have a considerable amount of experience that I have built over the last 12 years, 13 years of kind of working at G Squared and doing my thing. And I have felt compelled to kind of summarize that information. And in the beginning, I thought it might be a book, still may be a book. And then I was thinking about a series of blogs, and I started writing some blogs, and I still do write blogs, and I have a lot of potential content with that. But then it's turned into this because this is something where I feel that there's not like a pressure for like absolute polish in the first go around. And what I mean by that is that if I mess up or if I do something incorrect or in an incorrect way or in a way that I don't find to be ultimately satisfying, then it's okay. Because what lives on the internet is I think of these streams as like raw data. Like it's unrefined, but in there are the nuggets of truth, improvement, whatever you want to call it. And I feel like this format is more conducive to not only my improvement but my dissemination of what it is that I know and experienced and things like that. And so I liken this to like a brainstorming session in a way, a brainstorming session with some preparation. And I think good brainstorming sessions do have preparation, either in research to identify potential new areas of expertise or knowledge to bring into your existing set, or to kind of think your way through those things. So what I used to do is I used to take long walks and dictate to myself and basically talk about a subject for an hour or so. So if it was networking, I would just talk about my thoughts on networking. It was rambling. It was just whatever I wanted. If I wanted to digress, I would do essentially whatever I wanted, and there was zero anxiety tied into that. And the reason I feel like it was successful was because of that. Because here, in front of potential people, even though like what the dashboard I'm looking right now says I've got one concurrent viewer, but for the life of me, I am not sure if that is one person sitting in the queue or if that's me, because I'm not on it on any other accounts, but it goes from 1 to 0 back to 1. Sometimes it goes to 2 and stuff like that, but the 1 is pretty consistent. So if you are the one viewer, please let me know so I'll better understand how this goes. And if you're not, then obviously I'll just assume that it could be one or the other until I figure it out. So let me see this. So my options to view are concurrent viewers, chat rate, and playbacks. Let's see what playbacks is. Playbacks is just 0 across the board. Average watch time, playback, chat rates, concurrent viewers. This kind of has everything on it. Concurrent viewers. These are all the numbers. Okay, so now I've gone down to 0. So I probably have scared off somebody. Anyway, having said that, though, there's still pressure because what I record goes on the internet, and then I could be saying something dumb or ignorant or cringeworthy or something like that, but then ultimately I have to get to the point to where I don't care about that. And so it's kind of like public speaking. I find this to be a way for me to get over some of the uncomfortable uncomfortableness issues that I personally have with putting out my own ideas and thoughts to a group of people. So, having said all of that, I went through a period where I was streaming once a week for about a month, at least once a week, or maybe it was more than that. I'm not 100% sure right now. But then I stopped because I went on vacation. The kids had their fall break, and with the way things work now, I took off work to take care of them, and that broke a rhythm that I had. And then I missed the following week because I was playing catch up all week, and then the next week I didn't have to miss it, but I did because I had a certain amount of anxiety that was associated with, well, I've missed 1 week and all that other kind of stuff. And even though I know, and this is again an experiential thing, even though I know that it doesn't matter if I haven't done it in 2 weeks or 2 months, all I got to do is just do it. And I've been intentionally telling people and talking to people that I know in real life about me doing this because I want to, I want to continue to do it. And the more people I tell, the more responsibility I feel. And so I was kind of looking the other way with regards to that responsibility for the past couple of weeks. And then this week specifically, I had 2 different people specifically asking me how the stream was going. And I feel like they were aware that I hadn't been streaming, and that it was less of a, like, I wonder what is going on with the streaming, and more of just like you got this, I'm looking forward to it type thing, which is very positive. And even if it wasn't, that's how I'm taking it, and so that's what matters. And so I felt like now there were people depending / waiting on me, and I didn't want to let folks down. And so all that to say, I'm going to continue to do this regardless of how it may be perceived or judged or ridiculed, or all the negative things that are not very likely to happen anytime soon. And that's about it. So I want to continue to do this, and then at some point I would like to get into the avenue of bringing on local guests. So once there's definitely a viewer base, because I don't want to waste people's time. I say that, like, I meet with people in a one-on-one capacity and have these same kinds of conversations, but maybe it's like I bring in folks that I either mentor or have mentored or look up to, or that mentor me, in order to kind of show what those relationships look like, show what those conversations look like, because I highly recommend always seeking out somebody who has more experience than you in a certain realm. Not to copy everything that they do verbatim or anything like that, but just to get their experience and transpose that to your own experience, and then learn, more importantly, learn some of the hard lessons that they had to learn in a much easier and smooth fashion. And then we'll see where this goes. But my number one goal right now is be consistent. Even if it's dog shit, be consistent. Because nothing's going to happen if I don't at least have that. All right. So having said that, I want to jump into the communications aspect of the talk. And so last time, like I was saying, I just went through and kind of impromptu. I made a few notes with regards to hang on, I got to settle my stuff here. So I made a few notes with regards to like what I wanted to talk about and like a few of the high level things, but I felt like those notes were insufficient. They didn't do a good job of conveying the specific minutia that I wanted to convey in talking about communication, because communication in small medium businesses right now is a big thing. And it's not just SMB, which is small, medium business. It's not just SMB that's having to worry about this. Enterprises are having to worry about this too. Like, we have huge global partners with 100,000 plus employees that are struggling right now because the model in which they worked was they would have locations. So a location here where all the employees come into the office, a location over there where all the employees come into the office, and there was a smattering of remote work in there, usually for salespeople or folks that traveled a whole lot. But the majority of their infrastructure was in office work. And so with work from home being so prevalent nowadays, it's a struggle to maintain the communication you built up beforehand and then carry it through COVID. And so I feel like right now it's important to get at not just the how we do the communication thing, but the why and what's the intent and all that kind of stuff. And so I went through and I expanded out my notes, essentially did, I redid the example, so I'm not doing it live here because it took a lot more effort than what I initially had thought it would to actually build out the different diagrams and show some scale up to about 100 employees. And we'll get into that in just a minute, but again, it's a lot to do with the who, what, when, where, and why. And I think that's a good way to approach it, and not just like here's how you run a meeting, but here's what you do, here's what the content of the meeting should mean, and then you take all of that and you scratch it, and then you start over, because it's like, what do these meetings mean now in the work from home environment? And I think if we don't figure that out, we're just playing this waiting game with COVID and work from home. And up to this point, that has been a losing battle on our side, because when we initially went home in March, or mid-March, we thought we'd be 6 months max, and here we are 7-8 months later, and there's no end in sight. Like, as a matter of fact, our office, or our company, G Squared Wireless, has decided at this point to at least stay out through the end of the year, which at this point is only a couple months away. But I highly anticipate, especially with the way numbers are going now, that we'll continue it through to the spring at a minimum. But I'm not 100% sure on that, because we haven't made the decisions yet, because the numbers were going down 4 weeks ago. And then October has turned around, and then the state of Tennessee is likely going to have its highest month to date. And although Davidson County is not, its numbers are going up as well. And for those of you who are wondering, we did get rid of our social distancing policies the early part of the second week of October, I believe. I'll have to check that again. But it's definitely been skyrocketing from there. So I doubt that the Davidson County will lift their social distancing policies and mask mandates and whatnot, even if the state has. And so we are in Davidson County, so we have to adhere to those. Okay, so anyways, back to the communication piece. It's just like there's a lot of stuff that's encompassed in day-to-day life in an office with a group of people, that when you remove the people from their proximity to one another, and then try to lean on your existing communications infrastructure, it's going to slip, and you're gonna find that you have holes that are being patched by hang on, I had a name for it. It's either casual communication or natural communication. Yeah, natural communication. I'll get into this more in a minute, but natural communication is something that happens outside of a specific design. So it's like the water cooler talk. It's like, buddies going to visit each other at their desks, and just talking about movies and shows and building a rapport, and establishing relationships that are more than just professional. And oftentimes lead to out of work relationships, whether it be friends or within the confines of our rules, like romantic relationships or whatever. Because we do have policies that managers can't date their direct reports, and so you have to be dating somebody that's on the same level. And then if you're ever eligible for promotion, you are not going to be promoted to that person's manager. No ifs, ands, or buts. But from that policy, or even with that policy, we've had people get married. There's kids that wouldn't exist if we didn't exist, and that's cool to know. And then there's a lot of people who are just really good friends. Like some of my best friends that I have in Nashville are either current or former employees. And so I think that's just natural because we spend so much time together. We spent so much time together. And so there's an aspect of communication that we now have to consider where you have to supplement natural communication or natural conversation / communication. And we'll get into that in just a little bit, but let me go ahead and connect the old iPad. And then we'll kind of do a summarization from last time and then jump into what we got going on now. Oh, let me do this first. Alright, now I got this thing going. Okay, and so I messed around with this. I think last time I did this particular piece in landscape. And so I'll do this in landscape now. And the iPad, like I was determined to do this on the iPad because I wanted to be able to highlight and make the straight lines and all that kind of stuff. But actually when I got in here, I forgot all about that and then made all of this stuff that's just freehand with no shapes or anything like that. So looking back on this, for me, and then especially for some, and this is me, the person who wrote it and the person whose mind this came from, this is all garbage. So I can approximate the intent behind all of this, but that's it. And so this first piece here, and I'll actually be able to do this. So this first piece here is communication from an agent level to the top tier, and then how it gets from the COO. Was he, and then like a little diagram here. Was it good? Was it bad? Giving feedback. And I think that that kind of conversation from last time was positive, but it was just not locked into place. And what I mean by that is there's just no structure that allows me to like expand on it. And so this is just how communication goes up and down the chain. And then I came down here and tried to show what that looks like in a tier, from the top tier being C-level, all the way down to agents. And so the lateral and vertical communication, so the XY communication, is all good, but then I also forgot about the Z. So you got X, Y, and Z from a communication perspective. And so X and Y, or the X communication is lateral communication between departments. The Y is vertical communication up and down the hierarchy chain, and then the Z is outside of the company. So anytime you're communicating with partners, clients, and vendors, or anything of that nature, that would be what I consider a Z axis. And it still gets caught up in our communication because we need to be able to qualify how something gets resolved when things come in from an external source, and how we need to deliver when we're delivering to an external source. and then also how to manage that. And so then last time, I just wrote some stuff. So I was talking about departments, and this was specifically with regards to scale, levels of hierarchy, C-suite, director, middle management, ops. And then I don't even know what this is or why it's important. And then what I try to show here is the way that communication travels, or the way that an idea could travel off of here. But this particular graph is awful from a representative, or as far as being representative of something that's actually readable. So we'll just skip on past that because I've done better now. And then so we've got SMB communication, and so again, SMB is small medium business. And if you are a business owner or an SMB owner, then you know that. And if you work for an enterprise or have never dealt with SMB before, that's all it means. And I think it goes up to 200 employees or something like that. And then I say that the consideration for medium-sized business is kind of up in the air, because one authority may say it's up to this much revenue, another one may say it's up to this many employees, and so for the sake of this, we'll say it's up to 250 employees, and then you get into like enterprise type stuff. Although 251 employees is really not enterprise. But I digress. This is just for those of you starting businesses or working for small business or anything along those lines. So what we got here, and this is what I did today, and you can already tell a difference. This was essentially, actually I did it like this. So I got to flip it up. So this bracket right here is what we had when I started at the company. So I would have been a normal employee right here, and the operations person was at the time it was he didn't really have a title. He would later become the CEO after the person in this IT leadership position left. But when I started, he was just in charge of like making sure our knowledge base was kept up. It was a very manual and rigorous thing, because he had to edit PDFs or update PDFs every day, because in mobility, and this is a topic we'll talk about in a later day, it's hard to manage the knowledge that comes in and the knowledge that changes on a day-to-day basis. And so a big part of our success comes from our ability to create and manage and standardize knowledge base information. And we went from Excel sheet to a PDF to like a free wiki site that had basically zero security to a couple other wiki sites that progressively got better, and then ultimately we moved over to SharePoint and Office 365, and that has been where we've lived, or where our knowledge base has lived since then. Again, that's something we'll go into in much greater detail in the future, but for right now, that's what the operations person was doing, is they were just qualifying the knowledge, making sure that it was disseminated properly, and all that kind of stuff, and that we were doing things as best we could. Then you got IT leadership, and that is what phone system we use, what vendors we use. Phone systems and vendors are the same thing, but like, who are we using? Who are we? Like, what are our plans and all this other kind of stuff? And then you got ownership, and ownership in the beginning was a lot more involved, because they were the main driver for sales, finance, HR. I mean, like most of the folks on here had multiple roles, even though it was just, IT. One was an IT director, but he was so much more than that. And in a small business scenario, you can't really set hard lines of delineation between one role and another. And so most of these people were doing the same things, and because of that, they were having daily meetings where they were just assigning tasks to one another. And then anything that came back to employees were through update emails, which were the official thing, and then conversations. And so those would be intentional conversations that were brought up in the actual meeting, or they would be just casual conversation, or and it would fall under the lines of what I was talking about earlier with regards to natural communication that just kind of occurs. And when you're a small business, natural communication plays a lot more into your strategy than it does as you grow, because it's just easier to manage. So when I started, we had 8 employees, not counting ownership, and so 2 leadership type positions and then 6 regular employees. And so if the 2 leadership type positions, what in the world? Oh, so if the, hang on, let me do this here. So if the 2 leadership type positions were in the meeting together, then there's like 2 people they got to talk to each in order to make sure that everybody's up to date and knows what's going on, and or just to follow up with, correct, whatever it is you need to do. It's a lot easier to manage a smaller group of people, and that's just a natural thing. And so that was it. When I started, there wasn't much to it. It was just read your email, and that also applies to every single level that exists. If you're an employee, read email. That's all there is to it. That's how I feel like I got a leg up in the beginning, was that I paid attention to every email I got, internalized the information in that email, and then stored it in an appropriate fashion, so it was easily retrievable, because it helped me when some of our other processes around knowledge-based management and stuff like that were more loose. Because if that department head, or not the department head, if the operations guy was out for a week long vacation, the update of the knowledge base was not done early on. And that's not because nobody would step up and do it. It's just like he owned the process, and this happens a lot in small business. Like, he owned the process, so he was really the only person that knew how to do it. More specifically, in this case, he was the only person who had a license to edit and update PDFs, and it was specific to his computer, and he would take his computer with him in case something came up that he needed to address. Knowledge-based management was not one of it, and at that time it wasn't expected either. And so when you start a business, this whole thing here is mostly about have an intentional plan. Have a plan to manage information at the very smallest level with the intent to future-proof it. And so when I say future-proof, I don't mean make as many let me back up. Future-proofing is not perfect. And so in doing your due diligence with future-proofing, you think about how your business will grow, how it will lay layers of complexity to your hierarchy, or how it will lay extra layers into your hierarchy, and how those layers will confuse the existing communication infrastructure. And then you make decisions based off of that. So when we do this is how our meetings will change. And you may be wrong, but the consideration is more than enough, because usually that leads to innovation/improvement. Because as long as you're intentionally looking at it, there are things that can be picked out. And so if you don't, then you'll start to notice when there's a degradation in quality and all that kind of stuff. And that's actually one of the points that that I wanted to make about the impact of communication and this is, I kind of talked about this last time, but I want to reiterate. Communication increases visibility and accountability for everybody involved. So we're people, and when people make mistakes, sometimes we want to point fingers because we either don't know or we're ashamed or whatever the reasoning may be. We'll be like, well, it's definitely them, not me. And when you're open and intentional about your communication, you can usually track accountability back to a specific point, and that helps out a ton. And so early on in these smaller, when you're smaller like this, email is the best way to keep people accountable. So you have a conversation, you send a follow-up email saying this is something you're going to do. And now, even more so, there's tools like Microsoft. So if you have Office 365, which I highly recommend for any company, unless you're using Google or something that's cheaper because that's what you have to do, Office just has everything available, and I think the licenses are $20 a month for everything, minus a couple of things like Power BI is an additional license. And a few other things, but you do get Microsoft To Do, which used to be, well, it didn't used to be, but the team that built Microsoft To Do used to be the Wunderlist team. And so when Microsoft bought Wunderlist, they changed, instead of like absorbing Wunderlist into the Microsoft infrastructure, the team built To Do from scratch. And so for a while, it was an inferior product. But they have since brought it up to parity with Wunderlist, and now it has surpassed Wunderlist. And so in To Do, you can have these meetings, and when you're in your teams, I think Planner is the thing that's in there right now, but To Do should be added soon enough. You can coordinate all the tasks on a group level and assign them out, and so you've got complete and total visibility. So visibility nowadays is much, much easier to accomplish, and accountability, that is, as well, than it was 10 years ago. But we used meetings and emails to do that. So increasing visibility and accountability, you by default increase quality. And so I work in a services industry, so quality looks like it's specifically a call center. So quality is like, was the call handled in a standard fashion? Was was A, B, and C accomplished? Where C is like the thing is taken care of. If yes, that's fine. If no, why not? And then if you're in development or something like that, it's fewer bugs or fewer situations where you get into a live environment where there's issues because you're hashing this stuff out beforehand, because you've got the ability to break all of this stuff out and show it. And so there's things like a lot of folks use project management as a way to accomplish that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when you're starting off, you're not going to be able to hire an $80,000 project manager just to take care of those specific tasks. You've got to make your employees into project managers, and this is a part of how you do that. And we'll get a little bit more into that when we talk about the group leaders in a little bit. And then the last piece of the impact of a communication strategy is what it does to your culture. So when your employee knows that what they say is heard and that you're actively communicating to them as well, then it has a net positive benefit on your culture. It builds a trust that, maybe if I've got this idea and I do tell somebody, it will be better for everyone, instead of I've got this idea and I'm afraid to tell people because they might think that it's a bad idea, and then that would look poor, or that would reflect poorly on me, and so on and so forth. And so, in our culture, we specifically promote that, and so if it's a bad idea, we don't care. We just like it when people submit ideas. And so I'm able to tell people that, but more importantly, when they have those ideas, they can get them to me or to the COO or whoever it is that's responsible for integrating a potential improvement into the processes, which used to be my job, but now it's not. All right, and so back to the communication and scaling and stuff like that. So This is what it looks like in the beginning. So who is responsible for creating a strategy? So it would be the work product owners, and I thought I put do not disturb. Well, either way, I'm having my back fence redone, and that was a text about the guys coming over. So work product owners and business leaders should be responsible for developing the initial and then the iterations of the communication strategy from that point on, because that's just a part of your job. So if you're responsible for the product of work coming out of a department, then it's your job to facilitate the communication as well. And it's not all your deal, but it's definitely a part of it is definitely on your head. And then ultimately it would be, if you've got an operations manager or somebody like some sort of leadership type sponsor, especially in the early stages, it should be the person who's managing as a project. And so they're the person keeping up all the tasks. They're the person that are integrating all of the ideas into the project or into the plan, and then ultimately executing the plan into and bringing it into reality. And then I've got what here, and so the what you're trying to do is build, and I wrote this down so I want to read this out, and if it's boring, I apologize. But the what aspect of why you do all of this, and building and scaling communication, is to build communication that services your needs from an operational and cultural perspective, while not overdoing it, because meetings can get out of hand real quick in a hurry from a time sink perspective. And then also, and this goes back to what I was talking about, is something to consider that I haven't really been considering is the natural communication aspect of it, and how that impacts both quality, the work product, and the culture. And so when you're thinking about doing these communication strategies, and so the when aspect of it, who, what, when, where, and why, is as soon as quality starts to slip or before. And so, like I was mentioning earlier, when you're growing a business, your communication in the beginning is very impromptu or consistent, because there's so much stuff going on. There's so many things that are being delegated. There's so much responsibility that just doesn't have a place that it fits. So it's not like, we've got a problem with quality. Well, that's Greg, and Greg is a made-up person. That's Greg, give it to him. It's like, well, this is a group, so who's going to take care of this one? And so if you don't do that, like I was saying before, your quality will slip, and then the conversation goes to just okay, so we've got, client A who's coming to us and saying that we are not doing something that's specifically in the scope. Man, this is killing me. I've probably got a way to get in here and set it to where this doesn't go off. Probably should do that. Anyways, so then the where obviously is just that's your meeting spaces. Nowadays it's a lot more fluid than it used to be. So we have in the office we've got 2 primary meeting spaces and a few secondary meeting spaces. And so the locations are always set. We know, when we go into this room or this specific setting, that it's meeting time. And then that's what we'll be doing while we're in there. Now, specifically what we talk about varies depending on the type of meeting, the length of the meeting, how much stuff we've got going on, and then what we want to do, or what we're trying to do from just an interpersonal perspective. If I just want to talk about our COO's vacation for the first 15 minutes, that's not necessarily a slap on the hand for wasted time, because there is the benefit of building rapport, maintaining relationships and stuff like that. But if that gets to be the majority of a meeting, then you've got an unproductive meeting. And so you've got to, we found that standardizing the meeting places works. And it's not just we, like most companies at some point standardize where you have meetings, because you run into problems of not just the productivity aspect of it, but you've got more meetings than you do meeting spaces, and so you have to build standardized spaces so you can schedule them out as well. But then the thing to consider about the where aspect of it is, now that we're all work from home, like how does that have an impact, or how does that impact our meetings? And then are they shorter than they used to be? Is there less chit-chatting, or is there more chit-chatting? And then how would we still try to accomplish the same things while being in a drastically different environment? And then this particular area, the natural communication has to be considered, because if we want to allow for natural communication or something like that to exist, it's got to be facilitated. I don't think it has to be, we don't have to say like, here's your time to talk and this is your time to talk, but how do we create an environment where people can just jump in and shoot the shit for a while? And we'll get more into that later. And then so the why, which we've kind of hit on a couple of times already, is to keep morale and quality high. Like that's the primary reason to do that, because so G Squared has an employee focus, which means that we do the things that we do for our employees, and then the customers, clients, like everybody we deal with is better off because of that, because a happy employee is a better employee, because they're just more content with like the job they have to do that day. That's not to say that everybody doesn't have stressful times, because when you're growing, stuff gets stressful. But that's where we start, because we can't focus on, like, we have chosen not to focus on like what do we do to create the best most cost-effective product for our clients. What we do is, as a leadership team, is we focus on what can we do to create the best, most productive environment for our employees, with the expectation that the employees work to improve the situations that they're in, the relationships that they have, the partnerships, and all that kind of stuff. And so we spread out the responsibility of improvement to a lot more people, specifically with regards to operation and our product, while we focus on culture and environment and all that kind of stuff. And it works out, because I feel like from an employee appreciation perspective, like it's pretty wide open that we are there for our employees. Like we do things on a regular basis that are positive aspects of employees' lives. So I feel good about that one, and I'm a part of that too. So I've experienced a lot of positive benefit as an employee from being here because of that. Let's see here. I got a couple of. Let's see. Purpose of meeting, communication, standards, the flow of information. So then the why, like I guess this is, I just wrote this out, so I'll read it. So the purpose of meetings in communications to standardize the flow of information via person-to-person interactions by recording meetings in a way that can be easily referenced and separates accountability. And then a position we'll get into in a little bit is the meeting leader. So the meeting leader sees that tasks are performed by doing or delegating the responsibility of note-taking and information dissemination. And then so one of the things here to note is that early on we had, I erased something. We had these tiers. Let me make sure that I got this. Yeah. So we had these tiers here, and that's it. So what happened when we grew? Well, we break stuff. So this is what I was talking about with future proofing, because as you set up a communication strategy and implement it and all that kind of stuff, and then you start to grow, you add a single layer to your hierarchy. So you didn't have VP before, now you do, or you didn't have director level before, now you do. You have to rework your communication stuff, because if you don't, it'll break. And then you find out, just like I was saying earlier, that it's broken because you start getting complaints about quality being poor, or this person's not responding, or who knows what it could be, but it comes in the form of negative things, and that increases stress and all this other stuff that's just a general downer for your work life. And so proactivity with regards to communication will allow you to not break it as much, even though breakage still will happen. And so the way that I think about it, and the way that I would suggest that you kind of consider it when you're looking at your strategies in the future, is it's a pyramid type visual. And so you grow to a certain point until you break your communication. Then you spend some time not growing, or at least this is ideal, an ideal situation, because sometimes you grow while things are broken, and that's very, very uncomfortable. So you grow, and till you break it, then you fix it on a horizontal plane, and then that allows you to grow some more. And so eventually you learn to future-proof, like I was saying, and so then your break isn't a straight horizontal transition. It's more of just it deviates to the left a little bit, because you need to make small adjustments. And the goal would be to allow yourself to grow while scaling at the same time, with as little headache, with as few headaches as possible. So that leads to our second iteration. And so I'm taking these directly from what G Squared has done or is doing. And so this is not just this is not just me making something up for the sake of making something up. This is stuff that we've gone through and been through, and all that kind of stuff. So you can see here we've got a couple of extra things in the key here. So this key has 4 groups, and that's it. This key has additions to certain groups, but then also additions to the hierarchy. So we've added department heads, and we changed up our meeting structure in a way that I'll get to in just a second by indicating a meeting owner. So I'd say this is good for 21 to 50 employees, or at least it was for us. So we added an executive. So this is when we picked up a COO or CEO to build and maintain business goals. And so at some point, if you've got an ownership team and you're just starting out, your ownership team does all of that. They're the salespeople, they're the business development team, they're the solutions team, they're the pricing team, they do everything. And so as you grow, you bring other people into those executive roles to assume some of the ultimate responsibility. And in this case, our owners trusted another individual with that role, and his sole purpose was to figure out, what are we doing as a company in 5 years, and then how do we back that down to actions that we can take now, or set goals that we can start to act on now. And before, it wasn't really something that we had thought much about, because we had so when we got to 20 employees, we were maybe 6 or 7 years into doing what we do, and at that point we'd just kind of grown naturally. But we were in a situation to where 90% of our business was with one partner, and so if that one partner decided to not use us anymore, we would effectively be out of business. And so, it's as a leader in that position, it's just okay, so how do we do this? Or how do we deal with this? Where do we go from here? And there's some good decisions made out of that. And so I wrapped IT and ops leadership kind of in together, because that's this is me at this point. So when we were 21 to 50 people, that was me. And I did all of our, if you think of what a CTO does, I did all of that. If you think about what a COO does, I did all of that. If you think about what a director of operations does, I did all that too. And that's just what you do when you're this small. If you're the person who's the leader, even if you don't have any employees, which I think at this point I didn't officially have any employees, you're still responsible for a lot of the goings on in the company and whatnot. And then we added department heads because our departments got so big, or the type of work was so delineated or separated that we needed individuals that could manage the workload from those 3 departments. And then again, we've got employees. And then this indicates meeting owner is something we'll look at when we get down to the diagram. But that's kind of where we started with the idea of, like, no matter what happens in the meeting, X person is responsible for making sure that the information does what I was talking about earlier. It travels up and down and horizontally, and then on the z-axis too with regards to going out. And that's the first time that we started thinking about how communication, because if we go back up here, this is all internal, but this is when we started considering how communication looked when it went from us to an external source or vice versa. How it's handled when it comes in. See, meetings between one. Oh yeah, so the meetings looked like this was daily up here. So right there, that's daily. And then we went to weekly meetings of 1 to 2 hours depending on the meeting. So most of the departmental meetings were just 1 hour. But then the IT ops meeting was 2 hours and the executive one was 2 hours. And there were a lot of impromptu meetings in here in the beginning if there were projects going on or anything like that. These were just standardized meetings to cover normal things. So somebody in Department 1, which that's our help desk. So somebody in Department 1 was having issues with something somebody was doing in Department 2. They would have the conversation here. Or they would tell this person here who would be the help desk manager, and then in this meeting we would cover it, and then we would take it up to IT ops, the IT ops meeting, which this is an all-encompassing thing with all the department heads in it. Tell the person, so this person would tell this person, and then they would take it back to their department, and then they would tell their employees. And so in this case, I don't know if you notice, but every X is in a blue box, and that's because I, as the operations manager, ran all the meetings at that time. And so, if you've got 20 people in your company, running all the meetings in a company is not that big a deal. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 meetings a week, and that's a total of 7 hours. So 7 hours, so less than a quarter of my week was in meetings where I was managing the transfer of important information. Hang on. There we go. And so it wasn't that bad, but what we found, and as is with scale, what we found is that there was definitely a limit to what I could do with regards to managing people. So as you can see here, and this is also drawn with I locked all this stuff in. That's why the boxes aren't exactly the same size, but they're all relatively square, and I think that's cool. Oh, and also check this out. So I didn't know this going into it, but it can do more than just squares and stuff. But so I can do arrows, and it'll do the arrow, and actually it'll do dual arrows, and then that wasn't what I was going for, but it'll do the right angle things as well. But I thought that was cool because I was trying to do arrows, and then I accidentally made one while I was doing it. So, So here's the hierarchy, and we came to this because we met. And we're like, how do we do this? And set up a process, and then wound up implementing the process. The problem was that as a help desk, so these guys right here, We can't take those employees out and have a big old meeting, whereas the other two departments we could. And so real quick and in a hurry, we found that help desk agents were falling behind from a quality perspective because they were not getting regular updates outside of an email update. So and also I made this star with the lock-in thing too, so check this out. Ta-da! Fancy. Let me see here. Okay, so we were sending an email update, and this is what I was talking about earlier. Some of our agents were getting it because they were reading their email, and they had a strategy to keep up with the information that came in those emails. And then other agents were not, because they would just glance at an email, they'd delete it, or they just leave it in their inbox because they didn't have an inbox management strategy. Son of a gun. Hang on a second. Let me do this before some stuff comes over that I can't. Like with the election coming up, I've got some friends that are super duper uppity, and I don't want any of that to come through one of those notifications. So turn previews, never. And so this is what I was talking about. Like if I was recording this would be a huge pain in the ass because I'd have to stop the recording, I'd have to do some editing, all that kind of stuff. But since I'm doing a stream, it's inconvenient, but it's not the end of the world. All right, so this is where we were. Make sure everything's, yeah, okay. And so we had a group of employees who were just not seeing or not experiencing the same thing that everybody else was because they weren't able to come off of their normal desk job into a meeting to be updated. And so we were like, how do we figure this out, and how do we improve this, and all this other kind of stuff. And it was around this time that we developed a QC department whose sole intent was to pull samples from specific employees, review those samples based off of predetermined criteria, and then decide whether it was a good job or not. If it was a good job, then they get points that go towards, things you could purchase, like a day off or an extra day off and stuff like that. Or if it was on the negative side, it would put them on we'll just call it the negative track. We call it red internally. They're on a red path. And then green is the good path. And so on the red path, you get there's 6 different steps, and the first 3 are an email notification saying, hey, you messed up here, and they also start to get reviewed much more frequently. And then the second one is a sit down with the supervisor. The third one is a sit down with the specific trainer to cover the issues that they've been having. And if it's a general thing, just like general inattentiveness, then the trainer will go in and say, okay, well, here's how you need to approach your work. Because like if you're doing work and somebody distracts you, you look over here, you come back to your work, you're like, where exactly was I? Mistakes happen. We're people. It's not going to be the end of the world. We figure after that, though, if you're still messing up, it's just you're not trying. So then you get into write-up 1, 2, and 3, and then dismissal. To this point, we've only ever had one person go through the complete process for dismissal, and it was well deserved. Everybody else up to the has I think we've had 1 or 2 people get into the write-up portions of it, but once we did get to the write-up portions, then it was just like, oh, well, this is serious. I'm going to apply it myself now, and then it's worked out. So I digress. We did the QC, but then we also built out a training program for new employees, and we figured a way to include all of our help desk agents by tying them to training. And so we built this thing called TLDRs, which stands for Too Long Didn't Read. I think I mentioned it last time, but I'm going to do it again since I'm redoing this stuff. Because some folks just don't read emails, like I was saying. And so every week there's a specific set of content that every agent goes in and reviews with a specific trainer. And this training, this TLDR, works for two different it works in two different ways, and so I'll kind of just show it down here. This is the TLDR program. I didn't label it. So the TLDR is it's a time for the employee to listen to all the updates and have an interactive conversation about all the updates that have happened over the past week. Because again, in mobility, there's updates daily. There's not a day that goes by that we don't have to change something with regards to the database that we manage, because mobility just never sits still. Because it's not just cell phones, it's MDM platforms, it's mobile policies, it's data retention, all this other kind of stuff that goes into it. And there's a lot to carry, or there's a lot of information to carry, because you take all of that and then you separate it by, it was 4, but it's now 3 major carriers in the U.S. And so each one of those has their own plans. They have their own ways to approach things. They have their own processes. They have their own communication channels. And then, each individual customer we have has a ton of their own policies. And in this case, a policy is just a rule. So don't do this on your phone, do that on your phone, but only at these times, and things like that. And so we've got to deal with all that. So they go through it, but then more importantly, this is where this same group of agents who were here, and so this piece right here, this first point of failure, was because this aspect of it wasn't happening. And so our agents had to do, like, they had to go the extra mile, so to speak, in order to get some information out. Now, it still happened, because when you're 30 employees, you can get up and just go walk to the owner, and that's not a big deal, especially since we have open door policies and stuff like that. So it still happened, it just wasn't facilitated in a way that made it easier for our employees. And that's a problem for us, because it eventually led to slips, because these guys right here know what's working and what's not, usually more in depth than we do. And so it's important that we hear back from them, otherwise we're going to slip. So then we go to our current iteration, and you can see here that there's still a few more changes. So we've got a larger executive group. So we added support staff departments like training, QC, reporting and analytics, and solutions, like I talked about earlier. And some of these support staff, or some of these support groups, work directly with our existing departments, and then some of them do their own thing. So like solutions needs to know everything that's going on in every single department, but they take that information and then work to build better products for our clients' needs. And so that's more of a one-way communication, and then they'll give feedback to the business group of what they got from the clients and stuff, but it's not going directly to the employees. Whereas like training and QC is a direct employee interaction. And then we added, so let's see, studio and analytics, and then so departments added supervisor level, which isn't really called out here much. Because the supervisors are meant to help with ops and people management in their respective departments, while it's essentially like the old department heads were bumped up to a director level, and they still manage most of that stuff themselves, and they got supervisors to help them, and that allowed to bump them up to a VP type level, where their main focus is business planning and budgeting. Should be. In the small business, that's kind of one of the harder transitions to make, because you're essentially taking somebody's job and you're saying, even though you're working above these people, this thing is not your job anymore. You're in a whole new area now, and so there's all kinds of stress that comes along with that. So we added those folks to help out with some of that. And then so this gets into what I was talking about earlier, or this point here, is that employees weren't able to attend meetings, so we created TLDRs, and this is when we added a specific formatting to meeting notes. So if you go into any, we keep all of our notes in OneNote. Oh my god. Hang on just a second. This is Charlie.
Hey, Charlie, Brad.
I did. Yeah. I'm just working right now. Oh, it's just like things can't go smoothly. But such is life, I guess. So we were on the meeting formatting. So we keep our meetings in OneNote, which can be tied to Teams, although we don't currently do that right now, and it's something that we're looking to do in the nearest future. But if you go into any of our meetings, the formatting for that meeting, from the executive all the way down to the departmental ones, looks the same. We have an ongoing tasks at the top. Our tasks are like conversations. And then we have the weekly stuff that we bring up each week. And so everybody who comes to a meeting has the responsibility, I guess you could say, to identify like things that are important for everybody to know. And it's mostly just the department head reviewing changes, getting feedback, implementing like policy changes, stuff like that. And so we expanded the business development and financial capabilities by adding VP levels. I already talked about that. That's these blue guys up here. And this is what that looks like. So it's really similar to what we had before. We've got an extra layer right here with senior leadership. And we've got the TLDR right here. And apart from that, obviously there's more departmental meetings and stuff, but apart from that, it's essentially the same. So when you're coming in, when you're scaling up your communication strategy, it's important to note that you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you build a structure. Sometimes it does require a drastic change, but more often than not, you can just adapt what you currently have, plug the holes, and as long as it doesn't get too redundant or anything, then you're fine. Because again, you want to have just enough meetings to establish a good channel for communications, and then allow for some camaraderie or whatnot to happen. And then, what I missed? So allow for some camaraderie to happen, and then that's it. Like you can very quickly get to a point to where you're wasting people's time, or you're just overburdening people by pulling them off of their day-to-day job, and bringing them into a meeting situation where they just may be listening to an hour's worth of stuff that's not really relevant to them at the time, and that can be bad, not just from a productivity standpoint, but from a morale perspective as well. Because if you've run into folks who thinks that meetings are the greatest killer of productivity, they've probably been in a situation where a company drastically overvalued the importance of their own meetings. Sometimes, especially in small businesses, that comes from an overzealous opinions of oneself as a leader. So if you've got an owner who thinks that they're a serial entrepreneur, or some sort of personality, you oftentimes get in situations where they just like to hear themselves talk, and that will kill morale lickety split. But then, like I said, you don't want to underdo it either, because it has direct impacts on your quality and your consistency and stuff. So this is what it looks like right now. You can see each one of these meetings has somebody who's X'd out, and that person who has the X is the meeting owner. It doesn't mean that they're the note taker. It doesn't mean that they're responsible ultimately for the day-to-day stuff that goes on in a meeting, but they are to make sure that the meeting's happening, one, and that it's formatted correctly too, and that if there is something where the designated note taker is going to be on vacation or something like that, that they find a replacement. They're the ones who are ultimately responsible for what is being done and what's being followed up on and all that kind of stuff. And so usually, more often than not, the owner of the meeting is the one that's running the meeting in like who's got this, who's got that, but that's not always the case. So like the best example is this is the something else I didn't label here. Is that in this operations meeting, senior leadership owns the meeting, but more often than not, it's one of the department heads who's been delegated, who the responsibility of maintaining the information has been delegated to. I think it's actually the trainer, if I'm not mistaken. So it's this person right here. But who it isn't important. It's just the fact that it exists. And so each one of these things has the ability to create bidirectional communication. And so you can see down here the flow. So if an agent or all of the employees are considered in these, or all of our entry-level employees and like base-level jobs and stuff like that are included in all of these department meetings. So at some point every single week, an employee sits down for an hour to review stuff. And we have found in mobility, doing what we do, that this is absolutely required. We've tried reducing it, and it's only been to our detriment. Like that's something that we've been able to measure because we do a pretty good job of maintaining very clean sets of data that we use to set lead metrics and all kinds of different things from. And then a part of the QC is that we monitor those metrics. And so when they're dipping, or when we've reduced our meeting schedule, then the quality reduces too. And so this is the balance point as it stands right now. And right now we've got 60 employees, and at one point we had 75. And so this has worked for both of those sizes. But if we were to get to 100 and say we wanted to add like a CFO or a controller or something like that, we'd have to change up this meeting structure, because there's important information that like a financial person would want to bring to us, and we wouldn't want to just lump them in with like a senior leadership meeting, because they would be in that meeting, but that wouldn't be the topics or the point of having that meeting. So there would be a separate finance meeting that we would have, and then it would tie into the rest of the meetings in some way, shape, or form, because as you grow, having a firm grasp on where your money is, how you spend it, what you expect, your receivables and all of that kind of stuff is much more important than it is at a smaller level. And so this is the final version of what we currently have, and this is indicative of what we were doing in the office. And so what's going to change in the near future is how we address some of these things, specifically the natural communication / natural conversation, or how we include that in this model. And so there's a couple of things that we've already done, and there's a couple of things that we've thought about doing, but nothing has kind of been implemented. And if you're listening to this, or if you're watching this later, I appreciate it first, and then second, I'd like to hear what your feedback is on this, because there's a lot of folks who are in similar type situations, even if you don't work here. Social events is something that we've been doing or trying to do consistently. So one social event is just like essentially opening up a WebEx on like a Thursday afternoon for a few hours to just be a general meeting place for employees. It's like we've had different topics. Like one was fur babies, where everybody kind of brought their pet on, and that was actually the most popular one we've had to date. We've got one guy who brought his hedgehog, although his hedgehog was pissed because it was the daytime, and I didn't know this going into it, but hedgehogs are nocturnal. I also didn't know that hedgehogs lived in England. You could just come across a wild hedgehog. As an American, that is extremely foreign to me. And then, lots of people had their cats and dogs, and I think we had a turtle, maybe. I could be lying about that, but it was pretty good, a pretty good time. So we've been working on those types of social things, and that's also where you start to skirt the line of like what's appropriate and what's not for a company to provide, as far as like social engagement. And we think that is completely normal to do that type of thing, because we've done, although it's been a while, we've done intramural sports as a company before. We've had, twice a year we have parties. We have a summer and then a winter party where every employee is invited, and so we feel like offering a platform for employees to to casually join and leave, because there's no expectation that you show up, you stay the entire time, and then you leave. It's more just like come as you are, and we'll talk about stuff, and it's been pretty good because like you miss a lot of stuff. Like I personally used to have a lot more conversations about what was on TV, or what was good on Netflix, or what movie had come out that was really good, and nowadays that just doesn't happen as much. So it's a good spot for that. And then we've done a couple of things where, so G Squared turned 15 this year, and we did, like the executives got together and delivered a bunch of gift baskets to the employees. And so we reached out to every employee. We're like, hey, this is what we're thinking about doing. What do you think about it? Would you be okay with us coming out? And so I went out. I think I visited 12 people, maybe 14. And, I wore my mask, I kept my distance, met people outside because this was back in the summertime. And then generally just spent like anywhere from 15 minutes to 45 minutes up to over an hour at some places, just talking, just getting that type of interaction that is, for me, essential to just general happiness. But from a workplace perspective, it's like maintaining relationships that are vital to your culture, or our culture. And it was a blast for me. Like I enjoyed every last second of it, like even all the driving around, because I just don't have an excuse to drive around much anymore, and I like getting out and about. And so we're thinking about doing something like that again, where because we normally do second harvest as a company this time of year, and so the COVID has really put like a wrench in our spokes, so to speak, with regards to doing that, because we'd have drop boxes here at work. We usually do a competition where the people who drop off the most, or that we split up on teams, and then the team that gathers the most points like gets some prizes and stuff like that. But I think this time we're gonna do kind of like we did before, and we're gonna have a pickup date, or maybe two. I don't know. We don't have it all figured out yet. But the executives again will go out, pick up the stuff, catalog it, tally up the score, give them something, but then just have some time to talk. And I'm coming at it from the perspective of the executive, and so I will speak from that perspective. And again, it's something I really do enjoy. I enjoy just the talking to people. I enjoy everything about it, and it's something that I need. Going into this, I didn't think I was much of an extrovert, but having been in like a quarantine type state for 8 months, I definitely have extrovert tendencies, and so it's really positive. And I can only imagine, like, I've worked at places before where it was 40 people, and I never had a conversation with the CEO, never. And I can imagine what that's like, if the CEO shows up at your door with a package for you, and how positive that is. And even though from my perspective it's just like I'm just a dude showing up at another person's house, to have a conversation and perform a task, I'm not thinking about it like, well, they're blessed to be graced by my presence and stuff like that, because that's absolutely ridiculous. But it is an overall positive just when people take the time to show up and do stuff. And so from a social perspective on our end, that's what we've done so far. But then some things that we're considering are changing up the meeting structure as it stands right now to either be well, one option is more frequent and shorter meetings. So instead of it being like a once a week thing, it's a once a day thing with the intent to keep it capped at a half an hour. And so you're adding time to your meetings, but you're also allowing for some of that rapport building, or some of that natural communication to happen. Because if you've got a 30-minute block every morning that your intent is to cover the stuff for the day, and maybe it only takes 10 minutes. Like, you can decide to get off of that, and then that's fine. But if you wanna shoot the breeze, or just ask somebody how they're doing, or tell somebody about something that happened to you, it's a forum for that's consistent. And so when you're talking about interdepartmental stuff, you've got your employees to consider. When you're talking about departmental stuff, you've got like an employee-manager relationships to think about. When you're talking about interdepartmental stuff, these are the relationships that matter just as much, if not just as much, if not more. I'll get that in a little bit, because those are the meetings that keep people from pointing fingers. It's like, oh, it's them, it's not us. And it's like, anytime somebody makes a mistake, there's just a natural desire to place the blame elsewhere. And when you're a team and you're working on things together and you feel that, you don't do that, because it's not us and them, it's all us. And so what we find, and what anybody finds, is like a physical separation of even 10 feet without communication between those two groups will cause that type of thing. And so maybe shorter meetings will facilitate more just kind of chit chat, or they'll give more opportunities for chit chat, and that's taken into consideration, that we're taking these bigger meetings and shrinking them down. Then another option is additional short meetings to do the daily touch base, and it has the same kind of implications. But it's a situation where you're adding even more time, because you're keeping that existing hour meeting, and then you're adding this on top of that. So maybe instead of it being a 30-minute a day, it's a 15-minute a day. At this point, like, who knows? Like, we're just gonna have to start trying some stuff, and then record what happens and get feedback and all that kind of stuff in order to come up with the best decision. And then third is to extend the meetings that exist in order to focus more on catching up before getting to the business at hand. So instead of it being just an hour, say it's an hour and a half, but it's only once a week, or maybe it's 2 hours, but it's once a week. And then you get on there and you talk as much as you want, or you get straight to business and then you talk afterwards, and you just talk. You finish up the rest of the 2 hour block, or you just like, well, I got stuff to do today, so I'm gonna hop off. But that natural communication is definitely something that needs to be addressed. And I don't think any one of these ways is drastically superior to the other. There's definitely differences and pros and cons to each of them, but the ability to allow folks to build rapport has got to be maintained on our end. And like every single remote company up to this point has had these types of issues. And so some, outside of COVID, most of the remote companies that we know do annual or semi-annual gatherings, where they will bring everybody in the company to a single location, whether it be to a home office or to like a vacation destination. Sometimes it's bring yourself and that's it, and prepare to work for a week. And then sometimes it's like bring your spouse and we're just all going to chill and build relationships and just have a generally good time while throwing some work in there. And again, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with either one of those approaches. But now that we're in COVID, that's not an option. But what we can be gearing up is like post-COVID, are we bringing everybody back into the office? And if not, how do we approach that? And I don't think we will, because I think most companies have opened Pandora's box, or at least been forced to open it, because you got to send everybody home. Like, we had a work from home option before, but it was under the criteria that you're within all of your lead metrics, and then it was like a day, maybe 2 at the most per week that you could work from home, and now it's all day, every day. So those are things to consider with regards to natural communication. And as we adapt our existing model, which is this right here, to what it will be, I'll kind of report back on that, because I find it to be one of the most ubiquitous issues that are being dealt with right now. It doesn't matter what kind of company you work for or where they are, like the communication aspect of it and the relationship and cultural aspect of the communication is being jeopardized. And even if you were remote before, you still can't do anything like you used to, because there's no travel involved and there's no physical meeting in any way, shape, or form in most cases as of right now. And so all of those things have to be considered. And I hope that if anybody has any questions, you can reach out to me on the Twitters. It's just at Charlie Yielding, or you can also do at Minor League CEO, and we can definitely have some discussions about that, because the idea of and the phrase natural communication is not one that I've seen before. And I'm sure somebody somewhere has done it. And if you know of anybody who's talked about natural communication, and that includes like water cooler talk and stuff like that, then I would like to see that. But then if you just want to have a chat about it, like if your company is pursuing anything like this, or looking at any potential changes to improve your well-being, or if you're a person who's making a decision, just feel free to reach out, because like I said, I'd really like to talk about it. So I think that's it as far as the group stuff goes. This is a lot more information in general, maybe a lot more rambly, but I assume that at some point this whole diagram thing here will turn into a PowerPoint presentation with the intent to educate and inform in a more standardized way. But you guys get it first, because another second tertiary part of like doing these things is it allows me to just experiment with like not just the what I'm doing, but the how I'm talking about it. And I need that. So let's go ahead and switch some stuff around. And then for the last little bit, we're going to talk about the coronavirus. So if you're not interested in that at all, then you can hop off. And then if you are, then we'll get in it, because it's specific to Tennessee and Davidson County. So I don't know how interesting that is going to be if you're not in one of those two areas. But I think for the most part, the entire country is seeing kind of the same behavior. Okay. Just gonna put the iPad up. Pull up the spreadsheets. and then go from there. All right, so here is the spreadsheet through today, except for on the state side. So the state has not yet. Let me look and see if they did. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. Oh yeah, they did. So 2.6 cases or 2,600 cases for today. So I'll go through here. They actually changed up the way they did it because they used to have this big old cumulative graph. Let me see if they still got it at all. No, it's just this one thing. And now they do the daily stats. The issue is they round the numbers, so it's like 2.7, 2.6, and so there's something in the tens and ones that they're not showing. And I don't know whether they round up or not, but the cumulative totals are roughly what they're displaying on the internets. So I go here to the new cases. I had to change it up in the Excel document too. So I go down to the bottom, and what is it? 2.6. And then, so I used to have the equation on this side. So see, this is D. All right, let me show you. So this is this minus this to get the total for the day. And so now I've got to do this plus this to get what the new daily total is. So I just go here and drag down. I can do that. And then I make Control Z. And then again, this is something. So if I fill those two and hit Control D, it just copies the thing on down there. So now I get to go into the weekly stats in a complete fashion because it was looking like it was going to be the biggest week. Whoa, and it was exactly the same. And so I'm sure there's a small difference that's plus or minus. You can say this is plus or minus 1,000, which is close enough. Whereas the city stuff is pretty exact. But if you'll notice here, these are the monthly totals for the state and the monthly totals for the city. So the city, with 1 day left, is at 17%, which is roughly half, or a little bit over half of the largest month. And the state is they just had their biggest month ever. So with 1 day left, they have 900 more cases than the biggest month to date, which was July. For both the state and the city. I think July was the biggest month for the whole country. And so there's a lot that can be inferred from this information. One of the biggest things, though, is that masks and social distancing work. So they removed all the restrictions in Tennessee earlier in the month for social distancing, mask policies, so occupancy all out the window. Whereas Davidson County maintained all of their policies. I think technically we're in phase 3, which means bars can open to 50%. And it's like all of this to say, we still have a lot of businesses in Davidson County that are hurting and that probably will be pushed past the point of no return. Like I've already had like several restaurants that I love not make it because the complete and total shutdown, whether you agree with it or not, that we went through in the very beginning was a lot for folks to handle, going from as much revenue as they were used to zero for an extended period of time. And even though PPP was a thing, it wasn't that big of a thing, and it was up to the individual proprietor to figure it all out. And so you had tons and tons of business owners trying to figure out not only how are they going to maintain employees and all of this kind of stuff through the COVID, because at that point we didn't know how long it was going to last, but like how did they got to walk through the red tape. And so a lot of people just submitted late, and all the big enterprise businesses that were not supposed to get PPP money that wound up getting the larger portion of it, including the diocese, which, like, why would a church be applying for PPP? Who knows? but they applied for it and they went up getting a lot of it. Like, so we were intentional with being very rapid with the responses, and so we got our PPP money and it helped out. But there's a lot of small businesses, between 5 and 25 employees that just didn't, and that sucks. And it was mostly in the service industry, service and retail industry, which I guess those are the same thing to a degree. Anyways. So I understand that the measures of like complete and total lockdown suck and they hurt, and the indefinite nature of those lockdowns sucked and it hurt, and still sucks and still hurts for the city side stuff. But then on the state side stuff, it was lifted, and now you got more cases than you've had. Period. This is one of the biggest weeks. The last 2 weeks were the biggest weeks that have been had to this point, and I think that says a lot about the impact of social distancing and some regulations and stuff like that. And I am of an opinion that if we were going to shut down, we needed to have shut down completely for a minimum amount of time. And whether that minimum is 2, 3, 4 weeks, that's up for debate. But if we're going to shut down, we need to shut down completely. If we're going to do the social distancing, we need to do the social distancing completely, which means masks and sometimes occupancy regulations and all of that kind of stuff until it's gone down. But what we've seen from the state and Davidson County both is that they made these big old plans. They had all these ideas about what they were and were not going to do, and then they just threw them out the window at the first opportunity. So the state and the city both had things that were in phase 3, like salons and nail places and all that kind of stuff that they were supposed to keep closed until phase 3, that they wound up open up in phase 2. But I don't think any of that matters, because during that time there were no social distancing requirements, and there was especially no mask policies anywhere in that. So in mid-July, we got a mask policy in the city, and you can see here where it started to go down. And then at the beginning of October, that's when the state started removed all of their. No, hang on, I did it backwards. Did I do it backwards? Yeah. So in mid-July, where is that? Yeah, mid-July, we started enacting a mask policy, and then somewhere in here, we shut down, because the transportainment in Nashville, and just the general downtown vibe was just like no mask, everybody packed together, people on these transportainments just no mask, partying it up, and then they shut that down, and it dipped drastically. And then over time things get loose and it starts going back up. And I feel like some of this could be noise from the state. So if you're in the city and you just don't think that this is a big deal, you go out to the county or to a different county, you just go to a restaurant, sit down, no big deal. You're 5 feet or 3 feet away from somebody else, shoulder to shoulder at a bar. It doesn't matter. And I think some of that's bleeding over into the city because we haven't changed any policies except for right here, there was in-school stuff. So roughly half the kids went back to school in K through 2nd grade, and then the past 2 weeks here have been 3rd and 4th, and then they were going to do this coming week. They were going to do 5th. I think it was just all middle school, but they shut that off, and so now we're at a point where we've got a whole different situation. People still hurting for one reason or the other. And so we've got, on the state side, we've got the highest numbers ever, no social distancing, no economic no economic relief, which is why I think Governor Lee just opened stuff back up because he was tired of dealing with it. And then specifically no talks about deaths. So people dying doesn't matter anymore on the state side. On the city side, you've got a different demographic, and the priorities are usually different. And so there's a lot more support for wearing a mask. There's a lot more support for social distancing. And then there's the point of contention is just like, what do we do economically? Do we try to do we try to bring in or to create a situation where everybody kind of chooses their own path within these confinements? And so confinement one would be requiring places to appropriately social distance. So you can have as much as you want from a capacity perspective, but people sitting at the tables, and this is what currently is with the mask. If you're sitting at the table, you don't wear a mask. If you stand up from your seat, you put your mask on. I think that's completely fine. Occupancy, though, is like, it kind of gets tricky because everybody's inside. Is there a way to appropriately distance inside? I'm not really sure, but I feel like if you can be a lot more lenient with the occupancy piece so long as masks are a thing. And so bars are particularly hard hit in that area because it's like, how do you get a drink at a bar? You walk up to the bar, you stand at the bar, the bartender brings you a drink, you go sit back down. And so in the bars that I've been to in this era, that because I adhere to social distancing and all that, are geared towards dealing with that issue, because you go in, you sit at a table. The only place I'll go and sit inside, I've got to scan a QR code, place my order online, pay for everything online, and then the only interaction is when the person who's masked, who works there, brings the drink over, checks the ID, and then walks off. And I leave the mask on until I get the drink, and I take the mask off, and then go from there. And that seems to work, but it benefits places that have larger spaces. So if you've got a small cramped space, like there's an old darts bar in the collegey parts of town, a college part of town. I think it's just called the Village Pub. There's a Village Pub in East Nashville where I live, but I think this is called the Village Pub too. I could be wrong. Anyways, they got darts, but it's like 10 feet wide and maybe 50 feet deep. And in that 10 feet wide, you've got tables and the actual bars in there. And it's just that there's no way to go in that place without being, brushing up against people. And so, is it fair that person, the owner of that establishment, didn't have the foresight to buy a bigger place, and now they get punished because they, the amount of alcohol they can sell, or the amount of whatever it is that they're trying to sell, is lower than a place that has more space, that may be in a cheaper area or something like that? And is that even something that we can regulate? Yeah. Anyways, I definitely think it should. But I think masks should be our priority, and then occupancy should be a secondary reaction, or a secondary consideration. And then from an economic perspective, like, I feel like if we were to be more open than we are right now, so long as we did socially distance and all that stuff, I think we'd be fine. But I don't know if that's necessarily what the data is telling us, because as I was mentioning earlier, this uptick could be an impact of the county or the state opening up and just having more relaxed regulations in general, or it just could be because it's coming for us. It's getting colder. It's a lot of people have anticipated transmission going up when the colder temperatures did come around, and so maybe we're just hitting that wall, and it's happening no matter what we do. But I will say that it's happening no matter what we do is a gross overstatement, because in the city of Nashville, we are growing at a much lower rate than the state of Tennessee, which is predominantly rural. And so I think that says a lot, that the general attitude of the rural Tennessean is one of, I don't care about social distancing, so I'm going to do what I want. Whereas the general attitude of a city dweller is just like, I'm going to do what I'm required to do at the minimum. And in some cases, I'm going to full on separate myself from society. Like, I know people who still don't go to the grocery store because they don't want to expose themselves. We meaning my family and a couple other families, we did a pod where we got all, there's 5 kids together. They come to my house or another house in alternating weeks and do their schooling there. And, we're not going back to school because I don't think that it's appropriate at this point in time. And already at my kids' school, because they both go to the same school this year, there's been one student with COVID, and this is 3 weeks of in-school stuff. There's been one student with COVID, and then one faculty member with COVID, and they have they've been diligent about letting us know and keeping us updated and informed and all that kind of stuff. But if I had a kid in that school, it would make me really it would put me on edge. And not because I'm afraid of COVID myself, but more because I feel it's our social responsibility to keep deaths at a minimum. And so I do take, like, we eat at home 4 days a week, which means we make a meal 4 days a week, and then we routinely eat out 3 days a week in order to to spend money on local businesses. We don't usually go to any kind of chain stuff, and that's just because, like, in the city we've got all those options. But if you've got a favorite chain, supporting them is a really good idea, so long as they're still open. And so I don't know. I think at this point I'm just rambling because we're at a crossroads. And so, like, if you see these trends here and how they're kind of spiking up on both of them, I'm not sure if these bars right here are going to look way smaller in relation to what these bars down here look like, because the highest bar is the one that goes all the way across. So here it's this one, here it's these two. And so the bigger this individual bar is, the smaller these get, because it's just percentage based, and this is 100% of the total cases to this point. Then what does that mean, and what do we do, and what kind of draconian measures are they going to wind up like going with if they wait too long to do anything? So, like, right now we've got a governor who's just like, he's put his head in the sand for all I can tell. He's not addressing transmission. He's not addressing hospital occupancy. He's not addressing death rates. It's just like, go about your business. And what's going to happen, and this is despite the White House making a recommendation. So the Republican White House making a recommendation to a Republican governor in the South, that the Republican governor just denounces or says, no, we're not doing that, because they said we recommend you do a statewide mask mandate. And I feel like that would be a very appropriate approach right now, at the least. And I think if we were to do a statewide mask mandate, I feel like we could probably loosen up some of the occupancy and some of the, like, economic woes in the 5 counties that are still observing the phased approach to reopening. So, anyways, to summarize and then to sign off, like, the COVID stuff's not looking good, especially for business owners, and that really sucks. And I wish that wasn't the case. And a part of me wants to be in charge to make, to take decisive action. But then the other part of me, and the more rational part of me, is just like, no. That is a big old headache with tons and tons of stress that I would not wish upon my worst enemy. Unfortunately, it's a voluntary action to run for governor, mayor, president, and all that kind of stuff. And so when you do that, you sign yourself up for all of this mess. And it is your responsibility to take action, to figure it out, and not put your head in the sand. So with that, I think I'll be done, and then I would expect at least one stream per week from here on out. I kind of got through the feeling bad about not doing a thing, so it makes me not want to do the thing anymore today, and so I should be back at it pretty regularly. Have a good one.